I left the military and I ended up working for Bible Society, and you know, I had this mindset: if you worked for him, there was an indemnity policy in place. You know, that nothing bad should happen. I mean, hey, I worked for him. And yet I began to have stomach problems. Initially, they treated me for a stomach ulcer. That's what they thought it was. They would give me these white chalk tablets that you had to chew, you know, to kind of put a lining on your stomach. I mean, I ate just truckloads of these things. I ate so many of these things, I could have produced bricks. But anyway, it wasn't working. So one day they invited me to swallow a garden hose. At least that's what it felt like. And they shoved this thing down inside me, and within 72 hours, I was on the operating table, lost half of my stomach to gastric carcinoma. It just happened so quickly. I began now to seek healing with a passion. Any ministry that got down to New Zealand or Australia, I got them to pray for me. I was a desperate and a dying man. And then in 1994, I underwent major 10-hour reconstructive surgery where they took away virtually all of my stomach. And it's difficult to describe you pain so terrible that your systems shut down. My princess would say my eyes would just roll back in my head and I would wake up back in hospital. There were dark days. Wherever we heard God was doing something, I went there. I went to Brownsville, Pensacola, because there was a revival going on. I went there 5 times. Had every major person lay hands upon me and pray for me. I went to Toronto because I heard wonderful, weird things were going on there and got prayed for. I went to Bogota, Colombia, South America, because there was just an amazing move of God going amongst the house church movement. I went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, where there was a huge prayer rally on. I had Yonggi Cho lay hands on me. And you've heard of him. He's got a couple of people in his church. Well, he prayed for me. I had a man called Carlos Anacondia pray for me from Argentina. I went to England, where God was doing something, in Holy Trinity, Episcopalian Anglican church in London. Wherever I heard God was doing something, I went there, got hands laid upon me. I had so much healing anointing oil slapped on me, hands laid on me, I began to go bald. At least that's my excuse. I'm sure. Anyway, and yet I just seemed to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And talk about God just directing our paths that we might be at a place at a time such as this. This is what happened. A man from your nation, a Methodist minister, was in England and saw an evangelism tool that a friend of mine had created during one of my visits to Brownsville, Pensacola. I became friends with a Pentecostal, tongue-talking Messianic Jew from Richmond, Virginia, who was an Episcopalian priest in London. If you can follow that, you're doing really well. His name was Joseph Steinberg. He grew up in a traditional Jewish family in Richmond, Virginia. And he had accepted Yeshua, Jesus was Messiah. And his family ostracized him. His father's response was, "My son is dead, he no longer exists." And for 8 years, his father never talked to him. And his church in Richmond sent him to England as a missionary with Jews for Jesus. So he's working on the streets of London amongst the Jewish community as a missionary with Jews for Jesus. Ends up going through Trinity Theological Seminary, comes out the other end, an Episcopalian priest. So you now have a tongue-talking Messianic Jew from Richmond who's an Episcopalian priest in London with the weirdest of accents. And he had created an evangelism tool that used the millennium to point people to Jesus. It was called Y2000. And this man saw this tool being used in England and approached Joseph and said, I'm running a conference in Pensacola, Florida, a Methodist ministers conference, and I want you to come and you can launch this evangelism tool at the conference. I'd like to see this evangelism tool being used in some of our churches. The problem was I owned the license to distribute this product in a number of countries, including Canada and America. And I was now so sick that most days I was bedridden. I was weighing less than 70 pounds. I was a walking skeleton, gaunt and thin. I was living on a little bit of rice or a banana every couple of days simply because I knew I needed fuel. For every time I ate, it was indescribable agony. And so what we decided to do is that we would fly Joseph back into his homeland, and he would do the presentation on my behalf, since I owned the distribution license for the US. And at the last moment, I decided I wanted to be there. This was a dying man's wish. We were just about to make arrangements for me to go into hospice for the last of my days. I was in the final weeks of my life. And my heartbeat was, what a better place to die, to be amongst fellow ministers of the gospel than in hospice getting pumped full of pethidine every day. In fact, in the last 6 months before the miraculous event happened, there was not a single 5-day period where I was not being rushed to clinic for shots of pethidine or morphine. In the last 9 months before the event happened, there was not a single month where I was not readmitted to hospital for a week or two because I've either lost too much blood or had a bad turn or become unstable. And my wife went through her own agony to release me. And there was a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, amongst the medical profession, and finally my wife agreed that I could go as long as I took somebody with me. So a carer had to travel with me. He was a friend, he paid his own way, and his job was to carry my suitcases and to look after me and to bring my body back to New Zealand. For I was not expected to live for the duration of this marketing launch of this evangelism tool. When we flew out of Auckland, New Zealand in May of 1999, it was a very emotional farewell. My little boys were not expecting to see Daddy alive again. My wife was not expecting to see her husband alive again. We did not tell the airlines how sick I was. They would never have let me on the flight. I did not have insurance. In fact, when we boarded the flight that day, it must have looked really weird, for my traveling companion was right up behind me, holding me up by my elbows. We kind of, two of us together like this, and just handed over the seat, and he kind of held me up and collapsed into the seat. And the journey from New Zealand to Florida was just a nightmare for me. And as Joseph Steinberg flew from Heathrow, London, here into the US, he has God speak to him on the flight, which I've always thought's amazing that God would turn up at 36,000 feet on a British Airways flight, but apparently he did. And God tells him that he's going to do something sovereign, that this was a time to have an encounter with him. So when we landed in Florida, Joseph Steinberg's just pinging off the walls. It's like God's going to do something. He's going to heal you. He's spoken to me. And I was so sick from the journey. It was like right there on the bald spot. Lay the hand, pour the oil, do whatever you got to do. And he just sensed, I don't think it's right now. I just know that there's a moment, there's a time when God's going to do something sovereign. And frankly, I was too sick. For the first couple of days, I spent most of it in bed in the motel. There was some debate about whether, in fact, we should get the paramedics in, and I was so poorly. And then finally on the Wednesday, I think it was time for Joseph to do the presentation on this evangelism tool just after the lunch break. They came and got me and brought me in, and I remember sitting just 4 rows back from the front, holding onto the pew in front, and some said I looked absolutely grey and dreadful, and I just remember waves of nausea just washing over me, fighting to stay conscious. I remember thinking, God, please, let me stay conscious long enough to see the presentation. I'm happy to go. And Joseph gets up and begins to talk about this evangelism tool, this concept, and stops halfway through the presentation and just says, please, we've got to pray for my brother from New Zealand who's dying. Some of you were there in that conference. A group of men gathered around me and began to lay hands upon me and pray for me. And as they did, something sovereign began to unfold. For me, it was like I had taken hold of an electric fence. You know, the ones that farmers use, that It was just that, I remember thinking, stop jerking, you jerk. Get a grip of yourself. It was just, this power was surging through me to head to foot. And I remember collapsing on the ground, and I guess I was flopping around like a fish out of water. And for 4.5 hours, this power just surged through me. The next elective speakers got up and began to speak. All the time, they were just praying for me on the ground. And as it came to an end, there was kind of a hush, and those who had gathered around me, there was a few that were still close, they could hear something, and, well, one idiot went and got a microphone, and I don't know if you guys were there, remember, but they could hear the sound, this, and you could hear my stomach gurgling and chidurgling, and the guys around me all excited going, oh, can you hear that, can you hear that? And I remember staggering to my feet and going, oh, no, you don't understand it. Can't do that. I don't have a stomach. It doesn't rumble, but oh, I'm starving. Get out of my way. I'm going to eat your arms off. I became aware of a phenomenon that you would take for granted. You know, your tummy's empty, your body releases gastric acid, rumble, I'm hungry, I need to eat. I had not experienced that in 10 years. I ate a little bit of rice or a banana every couple of days because I needed fuel, but this overwhelming sense I was starving. Well, it was 6 o'clock and supper was ready, and so we all moved into the fellowship hall, and I'll be honest with you, I'm at the front of the crowd. It's like, food, I can eat. I got there with my tray, and I looked down and, oh no. Now, the meal this night was Southern fried chicken. It was just floating in grease. You could see those little critters doing breaststroke in the grease. There was this other stuff that looks like baby vomit. It's called grits. It's just horrible. Oh, man. Now, you be honest. How many of you eat grits, this stuff? You are sick puppies. Get up here. You need to be prayed for. That is evil. Oh. And there was this other kind of gluggy mashed potato with this brown... You don't want me to describe that. It's just... I don't know how you eat this. Now, a battle's going on because, see, my brain is going, don't you eat that. 6 months earlier, I'd had an outing with my 2 sons. We'd gone to KFC, and I'd eaten a bit of KFC. It put me in hospital for a week. My body could not handle the greasiness of KFC. And my brain's going, don't you eat that. Because stomach's going, full, eat, now, in here, now. Don't you touch that, eat. Don't you touch that, eat. This battle's going on. And as I'm wrestling with this, I hear God speak to me. Initially, I thought I was about to pass out. You can imagine several hundred and everybody talking and the buzz of everybody talking above each other, and in that cacophony of sound going on, the sound faded back. It was like I was in a cocoon, a bubble of some sort. It was just as the sound faded back, and I hear a voice that resonated within my heart, my mind, my soul, my spirit, my head, a voice that simply declared, I am the same. Yesterday, today, forever. I do not change. I am the God who heals. Now eat, for you are healed. And this was immediately followed with just a mandate that said, now freely you've received, freely you are to give. Pray for the sick. Just see that I will confirm with signs, wonders, and miracles. And with that just resonating within my heart, my mind, my soul, and my spirit, I began to pile up my plate with that chicken. I didn't touch the other stuff, but I'm putting that chicken on that plate. My support person grips my arm. He goes, Craig, stop. You know what happened last time? And I shake his arm. No, I think I've heard God's voice. I think I've heard God's voice. And as I sat down and began to eat this stuff, I tell you, there were hundreds of eyes watching every mouthful go in. In fact, an English Methodist pastor, a group of them had come over for it. One of them plonked himself down in front of me and began to journal everything. Now, how long before you lose consciousness? What happens when you eat stuff like this? It's like, go away, you silly Englishman, I gotta eat. I realized that all pain had stopped, all nausea had stopped, all spasms had stopped, all bleeding had stopped. I was absolutely fine. I ate this massive meal of greasy southern fried chicken. I grabbed Joseph and that Englishman and my support person. We rushed down to McDonald's. I had a Big Mac meal as well. That was awesome. I got home to New Zealand some 6 weeks later, and I'd put weight on. I could eat anything. I made an appointment to see my gastroenterologist, and I sat down with him and I said, man, I've been healed. Something's happened. And this man's looking at me and he's going, well, you do look a lot better when I last saw you. We need to check this out. I think we need to do some scans, and I'd like to do a gastroscopy and a colonoscopy, and we'd like to... I said, that'll be fine as long as you don't use the same tube for both. Well, you don't know. You're asleep. How do you know? You just whip it out, wipe it under his arm, shove it down your throat. You're asleep. I have nightmares, of a man in a green suit chasing me with this thing, No, not really. And they discovered a complete, normal, full and functioning stomach. Everything that had been surgically removed had been put back. Nothing is possible for God. Nothing is impossible for God. I don't understand it all. I just know that nothing is impossible for God. What do you do when you've had an extraordinary miracle? Do you know this is the 10th anniversary this year, May the 4th, 1999. I was miraculously, sovereignly, recreatively healed. And I am still, 10 years later, still coming to terms with just this incredible thing that has happened.